Hi, Mike here. Welcome back to the channel. Today's topic is a deep dive on the various eras of Fender Japan production and what makes each era unique and notable. From made in Japan to crafted in Japan and back again, we'll put to rest some inconsistencies and tackle the largest areas of misinformation when it comes to Fender Japan. But most importantly, we'll answer many of the whys when it comes to perceived value and quality. There's so much rich history to explore here, and what makes Fender Japan such an interesting topic is that it's a market largely divorced from Fender USA. The vast majority of the guitars produced by Fender Japan were never intended to be exported from their country of origin. We've designed this video to be as exhaustive as possible on eras of production, model tiers available, and serial and component dating for 40 years of Fender Japan production. And if you need to reference a specific piece of information, we've also engaged the chapters featured below. Right off the bat, let's tackle the elephant in the room, and that's made in Japan versus crafted in Japan, or as you'll often see them abbreviated, MIJ and CIJ. These two eras are often pitted against each other Thunderdome style, with anecdotal evidence flung from both sides to determine a winner. The most succinct answer on this topic is that Fender Japan's quality has remained consistently high since their inception in 1982, and any change in nomenclature is directly related to the factory producing the instruments. In a similar fashion to how Fender USA has shifted their factories over the decades from their original Fullerton, California plant to their current Corona factory, Fender Japan has also seen many changes in their factories over the decades, from Fuji Gengaki to Dynagaki to Tokai and so on. Each of these factories has gained their own reputation and cadre of fans, and rightly so. But let's dig into a history of these factories that's foundational to today's discussion. Fender Japan represented the first Fender-branded instruments produced outside the USA, and this was a unique arrangement in that it was a joint venture between Fender, Kanda Shokai, and Yamato Music. The primary thrust of Fender Japan was to combat the exceptional copies that were being made within Japan, primarily by Greco and Tokai. This was eating into Fender USA's market share. Fender chose the Fuji Gengaki factory for production, as that factory was already producing the Greco brand for Kanda Shokai. Greco had already been producing an exhaustive line of Fender-style instruments, so they were the perfect fit to produce genuine Fender-branded products. And with Fuji Gengaki came the original Made in Japan branding that you will see on the headstock face and above the neck heel for Fender Japan instruments produced from 1982 to 1996. Purportedly, early in the 90s, the Dynagaki factory was brought in as a subcontractor for Fujigen to help meet production quotas. However, Fujigen would still be the primary factory, and the Made in Japan text would persist on all instruments. In 1997, Fujigen would cease to produce guitars for Fender Japan, and production would shift to Dynagaki. And while there is some serial number and nomenclature overlap here, 1997 is the first year you will see the crafted in Japan text used, superseding Made in Japan and correlated to the change in the primary factory. Here's where things get a bit fuzzier. We know that the Tokai brand was also brought on to produce Fender Japan instruments concurrently with Dynagaki, but the lifespan of their involvement is up for debate. These instruments, however, would retain the crafted in Japan branding. The best sources we have indicate that Tokai production persisted until around 2008. This would directly correlate to the Made in Japan text returning and the end of crafted in Japan. Fender Japan would end their joint venture with Kanda Shokai and Yamato Gaki on March 31, 2015. At this time, Fender USA took over production of Fender Japan, and they continue to produce a bevy of unique models at the Dynagaki factory using Made in Japan branding. Let's recap. 1982 to 1996, Fuji Gengaki and later Dynagaki produced guitars using the Made in Japan branding. 1997 to 2008, the crafted in Japan text is used, and these guitars are produced at Dynagaki and Tokai. From 2008 to the present day, the Made in Japan text returns, and these guitars continue to be made at Dynagaki. Fender Japan's instruments from Fujigen are widely recognized for their quality and among their most valuable. But the argument that we're making here isn't that Fujigen instruments are necessarily better, although there are subsets of note unique to this era that are very, very cool. One of the buzziest of buzzwords that you'll hear connected with Fender Japan is JV, short for Japanese vintage. These guitars were Fender Japan's very first vintage reissues, paralleling Fender USA's reissues from the Fullerton factory and available from 1982 to 84. The JV guitars were extremely well made and faithful to their Fender counterparts from the 1950s and 60s, although Fender Japan's marketing would establish a firm bed of confusion right off the bat for future generations of collectors and enthusiasts. Unlike Fender USA, which marketed one 57 reissue Fender Stratocaster, Fender Japan had 3 separate tiers of 57 Strat production, all with slightly different feature sets. This is most clearly laid out first in the 83 catalog, where Fender Japan would offer the ST57 model, short for 57 Stratocaster, as the ST57-65, the ST57-85, and the top tier ST57-115. These model suffixes were the prices of the guitars. So for example, the ST57-65 cost 65,000 yen when sold new. Fender would continue some version of this practice for decades, and it's something that's still not widely known, leading well-intentioned people to pit guitars from different eras against each other. And one final word on model suffixes. You may find a really nice early Fujigen era Fender with a small circular numbered sticker on the back of the headstock. That is both the model tier and the price of the model in yen. You remember those little blue stickers on the back of the headstocks? That's what they are. I definitely took like 1 or 2 off thinking it was some bullshit. Or then I've seen like the little tan lines of where the sticker did exist for 10 or 20 years and then it fell off.
Does the 65 later become a different number because the price increased?
Yes. So an ST57-65 would later have a higher suffix, say became the 78 or the 85, because the price went up, but the model didn't necessarily change, but substantially they're supposed to be the same instrument, except they could be produced at different factories and some small features could still change over time, even though it's representing the same basic model tier. I give up. I know this is incredibly dense and confusing. Stick with me. So what would Fender Japan change between these model tiers? Well, dear reader, just about everything was on the table. The top tier ST57-115 model from the JV line would actually parallel Fender's USA-made Fullerton factory 57 reissue in almost every respect. It had identical pickups, pots, and vibrato block, while also having identical tone woods and a nitro lacquer finish. Right out of the gate, Fender Japan was making some incredible instruments. Soon after Fender Japan was established, they created their own custom shop, which existed from 1986 to 1995. These guitars would initially have the Extrad banner on them, later changing to Custom Edition. Helmed by Makoto Sugimoto, Sugimoto benefited from a quarter-century of experience in R&D and custom guitar building at the Fujigen factory. The Extrad instruments were essentially one-offs, made at the same level of quality as Fender's best USA custom shop offerings. These were made by a small team of craftspeople and represented Fender Japan's absolute best. In step with the previous JV line, the Extrad instruments had the same Fender USA pickups and pots as their American vintage line equivalents, while also having premium hardware and plastics and nitro lacquer finishes. The last biggie of Fujigen's Made in Japan years, which also crossed over into the Crafted in Japan era of production, was the Order Made program. The order-made guitars were models with non-catalog features, often including custom colors and unique pickup options. However, these features could include things like custom body routes or unique wiring schemes, even fretless basses. A Jaguar in candy apple green with matching headstock? No problemo. A Telecaster with a gunmetal blue finish, wide-range humbuckers, Strat-style vibrato, and small headstock with 70s Telecaster block logo? Sure thing. A satin walnut nitro lacquer finished Stratocaster with black plastics? Absolutely. A Jazzmaster with DiMarzio humbuckers and custom pickup surrounds? Why not? The order-made program speaks to the ingenuity, fun, and anything-goes mentality of Fender Japan in their earliest years. This legacy lives on in many of the short-run models currently offered by Fender Japan. So how do you know if you have one of these order-made models? Well, on many examples, you'll see a matching stamp on the neck heel and in the pocket, but as many things with Fender Japan are, this isn't a hard and fast rule. So back to our foundational question today. Does MIJ or CIJ have the upper hand? I hope we've laid out that this is a very nuanced question, with changes in factories, different model tiers, and custom features all adding color and shading to this debate. Yet without a doubt, the quality of Fender Japan has remained consistently high regardless of factory and era. Even Fender Japan's standard line models are something to get excited about. Beyond the Fuji Gen era of production, models replete with custom features from the order-made program would extend well into the crafted in Japan era. Fender Japan arguably reached a particularly high level of ingenuity circa 2010, once again under the Made in Japan banner, with many of their most prized models to date, including hollow body Jazzmasters and floral, not paisley, finished Telecasters. And with current production, Fender Japan is arguably in their second renaissance, producing a bevy of high-quality guitars, many of which are short-run or website-exclusive models, still not available in the USA. So now that we've wet your whistle on what Fender Japan has to offer, how do you know what you have and when it was produced? When it comes to dating Fender Japan instruments, inconsistent resources abound. So let's lay bare some of these common misconceptions and faux pas when it comes to IDing and dating Fender Japan instruments. There is a widely circulated serial number chart that used to be on Fender USA's website, giving loose date ranges for Fender Japan instruments. All of these serials start with a letter prefix. What you need to keep in mind is that these letter prefixes overlap, and the Made in Japan text or Crafted in Japan text will inform the era of production. For example, an S prefix Made in Japan serial number will be from a completely different year than a Crafted in Japan serial with the same letter prefix. The Made in Japan serials extend from 1982 to 1996, while Crafted in Japan goes from 1997 to 2008. The Made in Japan text then returns circa 2008, and for a couple years, the Made in Japan text and Crafted in Japan text are seen concurrently. For the past decade, Fender Japan serials have become very reliable. They now start with a JD prefix, which stands for Japan Dyna, as Dynagaki is still the factory producing Fender Japan. This JD will be followed by 2 digits. So for example, a JD12 serial will be a guitar made in Japan in 2012. Everything we've just covered is on said widely available Fender Japan serial number chart. However, there are some significant caveats and some things that are just plain wrong about this chart. Serial numbers with an A prefix. This is a biggie. The serial number chart in circulation says that the A prefix serials were used from 1985 to 86. Yet we found examples with this serial prefix as early as November of 1983 and as late as 1990. The A prefix serials were widely used, overlapping with other letter prefixes in early Fender Japan production. And this is a consistent fact. These letters will overlap. Another misconception of the A prefix serial numbers begins with Crafted in Japan Telecasters in 1997. these would have an A prefix serial embossed on the bridge plate while also having a second serial beneath the Crafted in Japan text on the neck. If your Telecaster has serials both on the bridge base and above the neck plate, the one above the neck plate is the one to use for dating purposes. The serial on the bridge means nothing, nada, zip. One last monkey wrench, Fender Japan did use A prefix serial numbers for their Crafted in Japan instruments, and these will be found beneath the Crafted in Japan text above the neck plate. Between the made and crafted eras, there are a number of crossover serials, and this will typically correlate to a script text being used instead of the typical printed text. Specifically, we've seen Crafted in Japan text with Fujigen era prefix serials from 1996 to 1997. The script text is phased out circa 1999, and this makes early Crafted in Japan guitars very easy to spot. One last proverbial sticky wicket is the reintroduction of the Made in Japan text from 2008 to 2011. We constantly see these guitars misidentified as early Fujigen instruments, so be careful. These second generation Made in Japan guitars all have a T or a U prefix serial number, and the Made in Japan text itself tends to be printed more boldly than Made in Japan in the Fujigen era. Beyond these factors, matching up the model with the catalog of the presumptive year of production is the best way to cross-reference features and confirm build date. With first generation Made in Japan era instruments from 1982 to 1996, how can we cross-reference serials with other component dates? As with all things Fender Japan, these are not hard and fast rules, but there are tenets that apply to many examples. First, many guitars have pencil dates on the neck heels, just like Fender guitars of the 1950s and 60s. You'll need to unscrew the neck to be able to see these dates. Sometimes these pencil dates are big and easily legible. Sometimes they are absolutely microscopic and easy to miss. First generation Made in Japan guitars will often have full-size pots with 2-digit date codes. The first digit embossed on the pots is the year of production, and the second digit is the month within that year. The pots in Fender Japan guitars are generally from very small batches, with multiple batches seen within a model year. This makes them a very reliable way to date your vintage Fender Japan instrument. Unfortunately, when Fender transitioned to the Crafted in Japan era, the size and manufacture of the pots changed, so they're no longer datable. And the pencil-dated neck heels, they were also phased out in the mid-90s. This makes the serial number the most reliable way to date your Crafted in Japan instrument. Around 2017, Fender Japan made a positive shift towards USA-made CTS pots in all of their instruments. These are datable like any USA Fender and also correlate to the very reliable JD prefix serial numbers. So maybe now you have a good handle on when your guitar was produced, but you don't know what you have. Thankfully, many, but again not all, because Fender Japan, guitars will have a stamp on the neck heel and in the pocket. This would come in the form of, say, ST62 for a 1962 Stratocaster, and sometimes you'll even have that model suffix included in the stamp as well. Thanks so much for going on this journey with us today, and we fully expect your head to be swimming with Made in Japan and Crafted in Japan facts and figures. We hope that this proves a useful resource for dating and IDing your Fender Japan instrument. We've also included many of our favorite resources in the description. Here at the Guitar Bar, we actively seek out more unique Fender Japan instruments than any other shop in the USA. Rest assured that our vetting process is even deeper and more exhaustive than everything we've gone through today. We have a real passion for these instruments, and no matter where or when your Fender Japan instrument was produced, there's something to celebrate there and to be excited about. We constantly find these to be among Fender's best. For all of our Fender Japan instruments and everything else we have here at the Guitar Bar, please check out mmguitarbar.com and stay tuned for more content.